I came home early and found workers in my room, but what I discovered next would turn my entire world upside down and lead to the most twisted revenge I never saw coming. My name is Sarah, and I thought I knew my sister Emma better than anyone in this world. We grew up together, shared secrets, dreams, and even planned to move in together after I graduated college. But sometimes the people closest to you are the ones capable of the deepest betrayal. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when everything started to unravel. I had finished my psychology exam early and decided to surprise Emma by coming home to help with the packing. We were supposed to move into our new apartment the following week, and I knew she had been stressed about getting everything ready on time. The moment I turned my key in the lock, I heard voices coming from upstairs. Heavy footsteps, the sound of furniture being moved, tools clanging against each other. My heart lifted thinking Emma had hired some help without telling me, probably wanting to surprise me with how much progress she had made. I dropped my backpack by the door and called out, "Emma? I'm home early." But the sounds upstairs suddenly stopped. Complete silence. An eerie, uncomfortable silence that made my skin crawl. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The hallway felt different somehow, charged with tension I couldn't explain. As I approached my bedroom door, I could hear whispered voices, urgent and secretive. When I pushed open my bedroom door, 3 men in work clothes were standing around my room, but they weren't renovating anything. They were going through my belongings. My personal belongings. My dresser drawers were pulled out, my closet had been ransacked, and one of them was holding my laptop, examining it carefully. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking with confusion and anger. The 3 men froze, looking at each other with panic in their eyes. Before any of them could answer, Emma appeared in my doorway, her face flushed and her eyes wide with what looked like fear. "Sarah, you're home early," she said, her voice unnaturally high and strained. "Emma, what are these men doing in my room? Why are they going through my stuff?" Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked at the men, then back at me, and I could see her mind racing, trying to come up with an explanation. We are doing some renovations before we move in," she finally blurted out, but her voice cracked on the last word. I looked around my room again. Nothing was being renovated. Nothing was being repaired or improved. These men were clearly searching for something, and Emma's explanation made absolutely no sense. "What kind of renovations require going through my personal belongings?" I asked, my voice getting stronger as my anger built. "Why is that man holding my laptop?" The man holding my laptop quickly set it down on my bed, avoiding eye contact. The other 2 men were already moving toward the door, clearly wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. "We need to go," one of them muttered to Emma, pushing past me toward the hallway. "Wait, hold on," I called after them, but they were already thundering down the stairs. Within seconds, I heard the front door slam shut. I turned to face Emma, who was standing in my doorway looking like she had seen a ghost. Her face was pale, her hands were trembling, and she couldn't meet my eyes. "Emma, what is really going on? And don't lie to me again." She shook her head quickly, backing toward her own room. "Nothing, Sarah. I told you, they were just looking at some things that needed to be fixed before we move." But I knew Emma better than anyone, and I knew when she was lying. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her voice got higher when she was nervous, the way she kept wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. "Emma, those men were going through my personal stuff. They had my laptop. What were they looking for?" "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but tears were starting to form in her eyes. I need to make some phone calls about the move." She disappeared into her room and closed the door behind her, leaving me standing in my ransacked bedroom, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I spent the next hour going through my belongings, trying to figure out if anything was missing. My laptop seemed fine, all my important documents were still there, my jewelry was untouched. But something felt different. Someone had been through my most private possessions, and I had no idea why. That evening, Emma barely spoke to me. She kept checking her phone, jumping every time it buzzed with a notification. When I tried to bring up what had happened that afternoon, she would change the subject or make an excuse to leave the room. I went to bed that night with a knot in my stomach, feeling like something terrible was about to happen but not knowing what it could be. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Emma screaming, "Sarah! Sarah, wake up! Why is the police knocking on our door?" I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. Through my bedroom window, I could see 2 police cars parked in our driveway, their red and blue lights flashing silently in the early morning light. Emma was standing in my doorway, her face white with terror, her whole body shaking. She was still in her pajamas, her hair wild from sleep, but her eyes were wide with panic. "The police. What do they want?" I asked, jumping out of bed and grabbing my robe. "I don't know," Emma cried, but something in her voice told me she knew exactly why they were there. The knocking on our front door was getting more insistent. Heavy, authoritative knocks that couldn't be ignored. "This is the police. We need to speak with the residents of this address." Emma grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Sarah, what do we do?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Guilt. Deep, consuming guilt that was eating her alive from the inside. "We answer the door," I said slowly. "We find out what they want." But as we walked down the stairs together, I couldn't shake the feeling that Emma knew exactly what they wanted. And somehow, it was connected to those men who had been in my room yesterday. The police officers were professional but serious when we opened the door. Detective Martinez and Detective Chen introduced themselves and asked if they could come inside to ask us some questions. We sat in our living room, Emma and I on the couch, the 2 detectives in chairs across from us. Emma's leg was bouncing nervously, and she kept wrapping and unwrapping her fingers in the hem of her pajama top. "We're investigating a series of burglaries in the neighborhood," Detective Martinez began. "High-end electronics, jewelry, cash. The perpetrators seem to have inside information about when homes would be empty and where valuable items are kept." I nodded, not understanding why they were talking to us. We hadn't been burglarized. Nothing was missing from our house. "We have reason to believe that someone has been providing information to the burglars," Detective Chen continued. "Someone who has access to multiple homes in the area." Emma's leg was bouncing so hard now that the entire couch was shaking. I put my hand on her knee to try to steady her, but she jerked away from my touch like I had burned her. "We'd like to ask you both some questions about your whereabouts over the past few weeks, and whether you've noticed any suspicious activity in the neighborhood." For the next 30 minutes, the detectives asked us detailed questions about our schedules, our jobs, our friends, and our activities. I answered honestly, but Emma's responses were vague and evasive. She kept looking at the floor, mumbling her answers, and I could see the detectives noticing her strange behavior. "Is there anything else you'd like to tell us?" Detective Martinez asked, looking directly at Emma. "Anything that might help us with our investigation?" Emma shook her head quickly, still not making eye contact. "No, nothing." But I was starting to piece things together. The men in my room yesterday, going through my belongings. Emma's strange behavior. Her panic when she saw the police cars this morning. "Actually," I said slowly, "there is something." Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with terror. "Yesterday afternoon, I came home and found 3 men in my bedroom. My sister said they were doing renovations, but they were going through my personal belongings." The detectives leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "Can you describe these men?" Detective Chen asked, pulling out a notepad. I described the 3 men as best I could remember, and I watched Emma's face get paler and paler with each detail I provided. "Would you be able to identify them if you saw them again?" Detective Martinez asked. "Yes, I think so." The detectives exchanged a meaningful look, then Detective Chen asked, "Emma, is there anything you'd like to add to your sister's account of yesterday's events?" Emma opened and closed her mouth several times, looking like she was going to be sick. Finally, she whispered, "I think I need a lawyer." The room went completely silent. Those 5 words hung in the air like a death sentence, and suddenly everything became crystal clear. My sister, my best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world, was involved in the burglaries. She had been providing information to criminals. And yesterday, she had let them into our house to go through my belongings, probably to find out my schedule and identify anything worth stealing. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The betrayal was so deep, so complete, that I couldn't even process it fully. "Emma," I whispered, "what have you done?" But she couldn't look at me. She was staring at her hands, tears streaming down her face, her whole body trembling with the weight of her guilt. The detectives asked us both to come down to the station for further questioning. They separated us immediately, and I didn't see Emma again until later that evening when she was released on bail. Over the next few days, the full scope of Emma's betrayal became clear. She had been working with a group of burglars for over 6 months, providing them with information about our neighbors' schedules, vacation plans, and valuable possessions. She had even given them copies of some house keys that she had access to through her job at a local property management company. The men I had found in my room weren't there to rob us. They were there to plant surveillance equipment and go through my belongings to gather information about my routines and possessions. Emma had offered up her own sister as a target. But the worst part, the part that truly broke my heart, was finding out why she had done it. Emma was addicted to prescription painkillers. It had started after a car accident 2 years earlier, but instead of getting help, she had hidden her addiction from everyone, including me. When her prescriptions ran out and she couldn't afford to buy pills on the street, she had gotten desperate. The burglars had promised her a steady supply of pills in exchange for information. She told herself she was only helping them target people who could afford to lose some expensive items. She convinced herself that insurance would cover the losses and that no one would really be hurt. But when the burglars told her they wanted to target me, her own sister, she should have said no. Instead, she let her addiction and her desperation override her love for me. I was devastated. The person I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. She had put me in danger, violated my privacy, and used our relationship to help criminals. But what hurt the most was that she had been struggling with addiction for 2 years, and she never came to me for help. I was studying psychology. I understood addiction. I would have done anything to help her get clean and get her life back on track. Instead, she chose to lie to me, betray me, and put me at risk. The night Emma was arrested, I sat alone in our house, surrounded by boxes packed for our move to the apartment we would never share. I felt hollow inside, like everything I thought I knew about my life and my relationships had been ripped away from me. I was angry. Angrier than I had ever been in my life. But underneath the anger was a deep, aching sadness that my sister, my best friend, was gone. The Emma I thought I knew didn't exist. She had been replaced by someone capable of betrayal and deception. As I sat there in the dark, something shifted inside me. The sadness began to crystallize into something harder, more focused. Emma wanted to play games with deception and betrayal. Fine. I could play those games too. But I was going to play them better than she ever imagined. The next morning, I called Emma's lawyer and told him I wanted to meet with my sister. He arranged a meeting at his office that afternoon. Emma looked terrible. She had lost weight, her skin was grey and sallow, and her hands shook constantly. She couldn't meet my eyes when I walked into the room. "Sarah," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." I sat down across from her, my face expressionless. "But it did happen, Emma. You betrayed me. You put me in danger. You were going to let criminals rob me." I know. I was sick, Sarah. The pills, they made me do things I never would have done otherwise. Don't blame the pills, Emma. You made choices. You chose your addiction over your family. You chose to betray me rather than ask for help." Emma started crying, but I felt nothing. The sister I had loved was gone, replaced by this weak, pathetic person who made excuses for her betrayal. "What can I do?" she sobbed. "How can I make this right?" I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "You can't make it right, Emma. Some things can't be undone. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Please, Sarah. You're all I have left. I've lost everything else." I stood up to leave, but before I walked out, I turned back to her. "You haven't lost everything yet, Emma. But you will." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into research. I learned everything I could about the legal system, about addiction, about the burglary ring Emma had been involved with. I studied every detail of her case, every piece of evidence the police had gathered. Emma's lawyer was pushing for a plea deal. With her cooperation and testimony against the other burglars, he thought he could get her sentence reduced to 2 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 18 months. But I had other plans. I started by reaching out to the victims of the burglaries Emma had facilitated. I introduced myself as Emma's sister, expressed my deep apologies for her actions, and offered to help them in any way I could with their insurance claims and recovery efforts. Most of them were kind and understanding, recognizing that I was also a victim of Emma's betrayal. But a few of them were still angry, still hurting from having their homes violated and their sense of security destroyed. I carefully nurtured those relationships, keeping in touch with the victims, asking about their ongoing struggles with insurance companies, their difficulty replacing sentimental items that couldn't be valued in dollars. Then I started documenting everything. Every conversation I had with victims, every detail about the impact Emma's crimes had on their lives, every way that her actions had caused lasting harm to innocent people. I compiled all of this information into a comprehensive victim impact report, but I didn't give it to Emma's lawyer. Instead, I took it directly to the district attorney's office. I met with ADA Catherine Reeves, a prosecutor known for her tough stance on repeat offenders and organized crime. I presented her with my report and made a compelling argument that Emma's case wasn't just about a drug addict making desperate choices. Emma had been a willing participant in an organized criminal enterprise. She had systematically violated the trust of her community, her employer, and her family. She had caused lasting psychological trauma to dozens of victims. And she had shown no real remorse, only self-pity and excuses. Your sister is cooperating with our investigation, ADA Reeves pointed out. Her testimony is crucial to convicting the ringleaders of this operation. Then use her testimony, I replied. But don't let her escape the consequences of her choices. These victims deserve justice, and Emma needs to face the full weight of what she's done. I could see ADA Reeves was impressed by my thoroughness and my passion for justice. She promised to review my report carefully and consider my recommendations. But I wasn't done yet. I also reached out to Emma's employer, the property management company where she had worked for 3 years. I provided them with detailed information about how Emma had abused her position, copied keys without authorization, and used confidential client information to facilitate crimes. Within a week, they had not only fired Emma but also filed a civil lawsuit against her for breach of contract, theft of proprietary information, and negligent endangerment of their clients. The lawsuit sought damages in excess of $200,000, an amount that would follow Emma for the rest of her life even after she got out of prison. Then I went after her reputation in the community. I contacted local newspapers and told them about Emma's role in the burglary ring, emphasizing how she had betrayed the trust of neighbors and friends who had welcomed her into their community. The stories that ran painted Emma not as a victim of addiction but as a calculating criminal who had systematically preyed on people who trusted her. Finally, I reached out to Emma's friends and extended family, people who might have been willing to provide character references or emotional support during her legal proceedings. I didn't lie to them or exaggerate Emma's crimes. I simply told them the complete truth about what she had done, including details that hadn't been reported in the news. I explained how she had been willing to target me, her own sister, and how she had shown no real remorse for her actions. One by one, Emma's support system crumbled. Friends stopped visiting her, family members stopped taking her phone calls, and the character witnesses her lawyer had been counting on disappeared. By the time Emma's plea hearing arrived, she was completely alone. Her lawyer had warned her that the DA's office was no longer interested in the generous plea deal they had originally discussed. The new offer was 5 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 3 years. Emma was devastated. She had expected sympathy and understanding, not the cold justice that was waiting for her. On the day of her sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched as victim after victim stood up to describe how Emma's crimes had affected their lives. I had helped many of them prepare their statements, encouraging them to be specific and emotional about the lasting impact of having their homes invaded and their security destroyed. The judge listened to every word, his expression growing more stern with each testimony. When it was time for Emma to speak on her own behalf, she could barely get the words out through her tears. "I know what I did was wrong," she whispered into the microphone. "I was sick, I was desperate, but that's no excuse. I betrayed people who trusted me, including my own sister." She looked across the courtroom at me, her eyes pleading for some sign of forgiveness or support. But I stared back at her with no expression at all, my face as cold as stone. "I accept full responsibility for my actions," Emma continued, "and I'm committed to making amends and getting the help I need to overcome my addiction." But her words rang hollow in the courtroom. Everyone could see that she was only sorry she had been caught, only remorseful because she was facing consequences. The judge sentenced Emma to 7 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 5 years. He also ordered her to pay full restitution to all victims, an amount totaling over $300,000. As the bailiff led Emma away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one more time. This time, there was no pleading in her eyes, no desperate hope for forgiveness. There was only the cold realization that I had orchestrated her complete destruction. But my revenge wasn't finished yet. Over the next few months, I made sure that Emma's experience in prison was as difficult as possible. I researched which prison she would be sent to and learned everything I could about the inmate hierarchy and unwritten rules. I discovered that prisoners who had committed crimes against children or who had betrayed family members were considered the lowest of the low in prison society. They were targets for harassment, violence, and social isolation. I made sure this information about Emma reached the right people through carefully placed phone calls and anonymous letters to inmates' families. I never directly threatened Emma or encouraged anyone to harm her, but I made sure that everyone in her prison knew exactly what kind of person she was. Emma's letters to me from prison started arriving about 3 months into her sentence. At first, they were full of apologies and promises to make things right between us when she got out. "Sarah, I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. But I'm getting clean in here, I'm going to counseling, and I'm learning to take responsibility for what I did. Please don't give up on me. You're the only family I have left." I never responded to her letters, but I kept every one of them. As the months went by, Emma's letters became more desperate. "Sarah, please write back to me. I know I hurt you, but I'm still your sister. I need to know that there's something waiting for me when I get out of here. I need hope that we can rebuild our relationship." Then they became angry. "I know you're getting my letters, Sarah. Your silence is cruel. Yes, I made mistakes, but I'm paying for them. How long are you going to punish me? I'm your sister, and I deserve at least a response." Finally, they became broken and defeated. "I don't know why I keep writing to you. You've made it clear that I'm dead to you. Maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe I really did destroy everything good in my life. I just want you to know that I love you, even if you can never love me back." I read every letter, but I never felt a moment of sympathy or regret for what I had done to her. Emma had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But my masterpiece was still to come. In Emma's 4th year of prison, she became eligible for an early release program for nonviolent offenders who had demonstrated exceptional rehabilitation. It was a competitive program that could reduce her sentence by up to 2 years if she was accepted. Emma worked hard to qualify for the program. She completed her GED, earned a certification in computer skills, participated in addiction counseling, and maintained a clean disciplinary record. Her counselors and prison officials recommended her for the program, citing her genuine remorse and commitment to changing her life. The program required letters of support from family members and community members who would help provide a support system for the inmate upon release. Emma's lawyer contacted me, explaining that my support would be crucial to her acceptance into the program. He emphasized that Emma had truly changed, that she was no longer the desperate, addicted person who had betrayed me years earlier. For the first time since Emma's arrest, I agreed to meet with her lawyer. I sat in his office and listened as he described Emma's transformation in prison, her dedication to rehabilitation, and her desperate hope that we could rebuild our relationship. "She's not asking for forgiveness," he explained. "She knows that will take time. She's just asking for a chance to prove that she's changed, to show you that the sister you once loved is still there." I listened to everything he had to say, nodding thoughtfully at appropriate moments. When he finished, I told him that I would consider writing a letter of support for Emma's early release application. I went home and spent hours crafting my letter. It was a masterpiece of manipulation and deception, designed to sound supportive while actually ensuring Emma's application would be rejected. I wrote about Emma's history of addiction and deception, describing in detail how she had systematically betrayed everyone who trusted her. I explained that while I hoped she was truly rehabilitated, I had concerns about her ability to resist temptation when faced with real-world pressures. I described my own ongoing trauma from her betrayal, emphasizing that I was still in therapy and struggling with trust issues that might never fully heal. I suggested that Emma's early release might actually be harmful to her rehabilitation, as she would face enormous pressure to earn money to pay restitution while also rebuilding her life from nothing. I concluded by saying that while I wanted Emma to succeed, I believed she needed more time in a structured environment to truly complete her transformation. The letter was perfect. On the surface, it appeared supportive and compassionate. But between the lines, it painted a picture of an inmate who was still a risk to herself and others, someone who needed continued supervision and structure. Emma's application for early release was denied. When she found out, she wrote me one final letter. It was different from all the others, written with a clarity and insight that showed she finally understood what I had done to her. "Sarah, I know you wrote a letter for my early release application. I also know that letter is the reason my application was denied. I've spent 4 years in here thinking about what I did to you, and I've spent the last few weeks thinking about what you've done to me. I betrayed you, and that was unforgivable. I put you in danger and violated your trust in ways that can never be repaired. I deserve to be punished for what I did. But what you've done to me goes beyond punishment. You've systematically destroyed every aspect of my life. You turned the victims against me, you ruined my reputation, you isolated me from friends and family, and now you've ensured that I'll serve my full sentence in the harshest possible conditions. I finally understand that you don't want justice, Sarah. You want revenge. Complete, total revenge that will follow me for the rest of my life. You've gotten it. I will never recover from what you've done to me. Even when I get out of prison, I'll be broken and alone, with no money, no family, and no future. You've won. I just want you to know that I finally see who you really are. You're not the loving, forgiving sister I thought I knew. You're someone capable of cruelty that makes my betrayal look like a minor mistake. I hope your revenge was worth it. I hope it brings you the peace and satisfaction you're looking for. Because this is the last letter you'll ever get from me. I'm done hoping for forgiveness, and I'm done pretending that we're family. You want me to be dead to you? Fine. But you're dead to me too. I read Emma's letter 3 times, looking for any sign of the manipulation or self-pity that had characterized her earlier communications. But this letter was different. It was written by someone who had finally accepted full responsibility for her actions while also recognizing the calculated cruelty of my response. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a flicker of doubt about what I had done. But only a flicker. Emma was released from prison 2 years later, after serving her full 7-year sentence. I didn't go to meet her, and she didn't try to contact me. As far as I knew, she left town immediately and never looked back. I had achieved my revenge completely and thoroughly. Emma's life was destroyed, her future was hopeless, and she would carry the consequences of her betrayal for the rest of her life. I thought that would be the end of our story. I was wrong. 3 years after Emma's release, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from a small town about 200 miles away. The headline read, "Local woman establishes addiction recovery center for ex-convicts." The article described how Emma Martinez, a former convict who had struggled with addiction and spent 7 years in prison, had opened a residential recovery center for women coming out of the criminal justice system. The center provided housing, counseling, job training, and support services for women who had nowhere else to turn after their release from prison. Emma had funded the center with money she had earned working 3 jobs for the past 3 years, living in a tiny apartment and saving every penny she could. "I know what it's like to have no one and nowhere to go when you get out," Emma was quoted as saying. "I know what it's like to feel like your mistakes define you forever. I want to give women a chance to rebuild their lives and prove that people can change." The article mentioned that Emma herself had been betrayed by family members after her conviction and had served her full sentence with no support system. Instead of becoming bitter or giving up, she had used her experience to help others in similar situations. The recovery center was already helping 15 women, and Emma was working to expand the program. Local officials praised her work and described her as an inspiration to everyone who had written off ex-convicts as hopeless cases. At the bottom of the newspaper clipping was a handwritten note: "Sarah, I thought you should know that your revenge taught me something important. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the foundation for the best thing you ever do. Thank you for teaching me who I really am and what I'm capable of. Emma P.S. I forgive you." I stared at the newspaper clipping for a long time, reading the article over and over again. Emma had not only survived my revenge, she had used it to transform herself into someone better than she had ever been before. While I had spent years nurturing my anger and perfecting my cruelty, Emma had spent those same years learning to help others and building something meaningful with her life. I had destroyed her old life completely, but instead of destroying her, I had freed her to become the person she was always meant to be. The worst part was her postscript. She forgave me. After everything I had done to her, after the systematic cruelty and calculated revenge, she had found a way to forgive me. I realized in that moment that Emma had gotten the last word in our twisted game. She had turned my revenge into her redemption, and my cruelty into her compassion. I had won every battle, but she had won the war. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the successful life I had built while orchestrating Emma's destruction. I had my psychology degree, a good job, a nice apartment, and the satisfaction of knowing that I had gotten perfect revenge against someone who had betrayed me. But Emma had something I would never have: peace. She had faced the worst thing she had ever done, accepted full responsibility for it, and used that experience to become someone who helped others. She had transformed her greatest failure into her greatest success. I, on the other hand, had let my anger and need for revenge consume me for 7 years. I had become someone capable of cruelty I never thought possible. I had won my revenge, but I had lost myself in the process. The next morning, I drove 200 miles to the small town where Emma's recovery center was located. I didn't have a plan or a speech prepared. I just needed to see for myself what she had built. The recovery center was in a converted house in a quiet residential neighborhood. It looked warm and welcoming, with flower gardens in the front yard and a sign that read New Beginnings Recovery Center, where every day is a fresh start. I sat in my car across the street for over an hour, watching women come and go from the center. They looked like they belonged there, like they had found a place where they could heal and rebuild their lives. Finally, I saw Emma come out of the front door. She looked older, but healthier than she had in years. Her face had a serenity that I had never seen before, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had found her purpose in life. She was talking with a young woman who was clearly struggling, probably newly released from prison. Emma's body language was patient and compassionate, and I could see her giving the woman hope just by listening to her. I realized that I could sit there all day and never find the courage to get out of my car and face what I had done. So I drove home, and I never went back. But Emma's story wasn't over yet. Over the next few years, I followed Emma's work from a distance. I found articles about her recovery center online, read about the women she was helping, and watched as her program grew and expanded. She was invited to speak at conferences about addiction recovery and criminal justice reform. She testified before state legislature committees about the need for better support services for ex-convicts. She became a respected voice in the field of rehabilitation and second chances. And in every interview, every article, every speech, Emma talked about how her own experience with betrayal and revenge had taught her about the power of forgiveness and redemption. She never mentioned my name or gave specific details about what had happened between us. But she often said that the person who had hurt her the most had also taught her the most important lesson of her life, that holding on to anger and revenge only destroys the person carrying it. 5 years after Emma's release from prison, I received another package in the mail. This time, it contained an invitation. Emma was being honored by the state governor for her work in addiction recovery and criminal justice reform. She was receiving the State Humanitarian Award for her dedication to helping others rebuild their lives after incarceration. The invitation was addressed to me personally, with a handwritten note. "Sarah, I would be honored if you would attend this ceremony. Not because I need your approval or support, but because I want you to see what we can become when we choose healing over revenge. I hope you'll consider giving yourself the same gift of forgiveness that I had to learn to give to both of us." Emma. I stared at the invitation for days, reading Emma's note over and over again. She was giving me an opportunity to witness her triumph, to see how she had transformed the worst experience of her life into something beautiful and meaningful. But more than that, she was offering me a way back from the darkness I had created in my own heart. She was showing me that forgiveness was possible, even after the deepest betrayals and cruelest revenges. I didn't go to the ceremony. I wasn't ready to face Emma or to confront what I had become in my pursuit of revenge. But I watched the ceremony online, and I saw Emma accept her award with grace and humility. In her acceptance speech, she talked about the women she had helped and the importance of believing that people could change and grow beyond their mistakes. 7 years ago, she said, I was in prison, alone and hopeless, convinced that my life was over and that I would never be anything more than the worst thing I had ever done. I was wrong. We are all more than our worst moments, and we all deserve a chance at redemption. But redemption isn't something that's given to us. It's something we have to choose every day, in every decision we make about how to respond to pain and betrayal and disappointment. We can choose revenge, or we can choose healing. We can choose to be defined by what was done to us, or we can choose to be defined by what we do next. As I listened to Emma's words, I realized that she had become everything I had once admired in her and more. She had taken the worst experience of her life and used it to develop wisdom, compassion, and strength that she never would have had otherwise. I, on the other hand, had taken the worst experience of my life and used it to develop cruelty, manipulation, and a capacity for revenge that had poisoned my soul. Emma had chosen healing. I had chosen revenge. And she had won. But my story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge comes not from destroying your enemy, but from showing them a mirror that reflects who they've become. 2 months after Emma's award ceremony, I made a decision that would change everything. I started going to therapy. Not because I felt guilty about what I had done to Emma. Not because I wanted to make amends or seek forgiveness. But because I was starting to realize that my perfect revenge had created a perfect prison for myself. I had spent 7 years of my life consumed with hatred and the need for vengeance. 7 years of calculating cruelty and systematic destruction. 7 years of becoming someone I didn't recognize when I looked in the mirror. My therapist, Dr. Rebecca Hayes, was a woman in her 50s who specialized in trauma and family relationships. She had kind eyes but a direct manner that cut through excuses and self-deception. "Tell me about your sister," she said during our first session. I spent the hour describing Emma's betrayal, her addiction, the men in my room, the police at our door. I painted a picture of myself as the innocent victim and Emma as the calculating criminal who had destroyed our relationship. Dr. Hayes listened without interruption, taking notes occasionally but never showing judgment or surprise at anything I told her. "And how did you respond to Emma's betrayal?" she asked when I finished. That's when I told her about my revenge. All of it. The victim impact report, the civil lawsuit, the destruction of Emma's support system, the letter that ensured her early release was denied. For the first time in years, I spoke about my actions out loud, and hearing them in my own voice was jarring. The systematic cruelty, the calculated manipulation, the cold satisfaction I had felt as Emma's world crumbled around her. Dr. Hayes listened to this part of my story with the same professional calm, but I could see something shift in her expression. "Sarah," she said when I finished, "I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say. Emma betrayed you, and that was wrong. Her addiction doesn't excuse her actions, and you had every right to be angry and hurt. But what you did in response wasn't justice. It was systematic psychological warfare designed to destroy another human being completely. You became obsessed with revenge to the point where it consumed your life and transformed you into someone capable of cruelty that goes far beyond anything Emma did to you. Her words hit me like a physical blow. No one had ever called me out so directly on what I had done. Emma made a series of bad choices driven by addiction and desperation, Dr. Hayes continued. You made a series of calculated choices driven by hatred and the need for revenge. Her choices were destructive and wrong, but yours were malicious and cruel. I left that first therapy session shaken and angry. Dr. Hayes didn't understand. She hadn't lived through Emma's betrayal. She didn't know what it felt like to have the person you trusted most in the world put you in danger for drug money. But I kept going back, week after week, because something about Dr. Hayes' directness resonated with me. She wasn't interested in making me feel better or validating my choices. She was interested in helping me see the truth about what I had become. Over the months, Dr. Hayes helped me understand that my revenge against Emma had been about more than justice or punishment. It had been about control. Emma's betrayal had left me feeling powerless and vulnerable, so I had dedicated myself to becoming powerful enough to destroy her completely. The problem with revenge, Dr. Hayes explained, is that it requires you to stay connected to the person who hurt you. You've spent 7 years of your life thinking about Emma every day, planning her destruction, monitoring her suffering. You've been more intimately connected to her than most married couples are to each other. She was right. I had spent more time and energy on Emma in the years after her betrayal than I had in all the years before it. Emma served her time in prison and moved on with her life, Dr. Hayes continued. But you've been serving a life sentence in the prison of your own hatred. Who's really being punished here? That question haunted me for weeks. Who was really being punished? Emma had suffered tremendously for her crimes, but she had also found redemption, purpose, and peace. She had built a life dedicated to helping others and making a positive difference in the world. I had gotten my revenge, but I had also spent 7 years of my life nurturing hatred, perfecting cruelty, and becoming someone I never wanted to be. I had won every battle against Emma, but I had lost myself in the process. 6 months into therapy, Dr. Hayes gave me an assignment that terrified me. I want you to write a letter to Emma, she said. Not to send to her, just for yourself. I want you to write down everything you want to say to her, everything you've never been able to express. I resisted the assignment for weeks. I didn't want to write to Emma. I didn't want to think about her or examine my feelings about what had happened between us. But Dr. Hayes was persistent. You can't heal from something you won't face, she said. And you can't forgive someone you won't acknowledge as human. Finally, I sat down and started writing. The letter began as an angry rant, full of accusations and justifications for my revenge. But as I wrote, something unexpected happened. I started remembering Emma before the addiction, before the betrayal, before everything went wrong between us. I remembered the sister who had held me when I cried over my first heartbreak. The sister who had stayed up all night helping me study for my college entrance exams. The sister who had been my best friend and closest confidant for most of my life. I remembered that Emma's addiction hadn't appeared overnight. There had been signs that I had missed or ignored. Times when she seemed distant or distracted. Moments when she had seemed like she wanted to tell me something but couldn't find the words. What if she had been trying to ask for help but hadn't known how? What if her pride or shame had prevented her from admitting she had a problem? For the first time in 7 years, I allowed myself to consider that Emma's betrayal might have been the desperate act of a sick person rather than the calculated choice of a malicious person. That didn't excuse what she had done. But it changed how I understood it. I rewrote the letter several times over the following weeks. Each version was different, reflecting my evolving understanding of Emma, of myself, and of what had really happened between us. The final version was 10 pages long and filled with things I had never allowed myself to think or feel. I wrote about how Emma's betrayal had devastated me, but I also wrote about how my revenge had consumed me. I wrote about the sister I had loved and lost, and about the person I had become in response to that loss. At the end of the letter, I wrote something that surprised me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did to me, Emma. But I'm starting to think I need to forgive myself for what I did to you. Dr. Hayes read the letter during our next session and nodded approvingly. This is the first time you've taken any responsibility for your own actions in this situation, she said. It's a start. But she wasn't finished challenging me. Sarah, I want you to consider something. You've told me many times that Emma's betrayal was unforgivable. But you've never really explained why your revenge was justified. What makes your cruelty more acceptable than her weakness? I stumbled over my answer. She betrayed me first. She put me in danger. She chose drugs over family. And you chose revenge over healing. You chose cruelty over forgiveness. You chose to spend 7 years of your life destroying another person rather than rebuilding your own life. How is that better? I couldn't answer her question, because I was starting to realize there was no good answer. A year into therapy, Dr. Hayes suggested something that made my blood run cold. I think you should consider reaching out to Emma, she said. Absolutely not, I replied immediately. I'm not ready for that. I'm not suggesting you ask for forgiveness or try to rebuild your relationship, Dr. Hayes clarified. I'm suggesting that you might need to apologize for what you did to her. The idea of apologizing to Emma felt impossible. She had betrayed me first. She had started this whole chain of events with her addiction and her crimes. But Dr. Hayes pushed back against my resistance. Emma has already taken responsibility for her actions. She served her time in prison, she's made amends to her victims, and she's dedicated her life to helping others. When are you going to take responsibility for yours? That question kept me awake at night for weeks. When was I going to take responsibility for my actions? Emma had committed crimes, served her sentence, and worked to make amends. But I had never faced any consequences for what I had done to her. I had never acknowledged that my systematic destruction of her life was wrong. I had never taken responsibility for the person I had become in my pursuit of revenge. 2 years into therapy, I made a decision that terrified me. I was going to drive to Emma's recovery center and apologize to her face to face. I didn't tell Dr. Hayes about my plan because I knew she would want to spend weeks preparing me for the encounter. I didn't want to prepare. I didn't want to plan what I would say or anticipate how Emma might respond. I just wanted to face her and tell her the truth about what I had done and why I had done it. The drive to Emma's recovery center took 3 hours, and I spent the entire time rehearsing what I would say. But when I pulled into the parking lot and saw the building where Emma had built her new life, all my rehearsed words disappeared. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to find the courage to get out. Finally, I forced myself to walk to the front door before I could change my mind. The receptionist was a young woman who looked like she had seen some hard times but had found her way to a better place. She greeted me with a warm smile and asked how she could help me. I'd like to speak with Emma Martinez, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you have an appointment? She asked kindly. No, I'm her sister. The woman's expression changed immediately. She studied my face carefully, as if she was trying to reconcile what she saw with something she had been told. I'll let her know you're here, she said quietly, picking up the phone. I waited in the lobby for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes. The walls were covered with photos of women who had completed the recovery program, testimonials from success stories, and inspirational quotes about second chances and redemption. Finally, Emma appeared in the doorway that led to the offices. She looked exactly as I remembered from the online video of her award ceremony, but seeing her in person was different. She looked older, more mature, but there was a strength and peace in her face that I had never seen before. We stared at each other for a long moment, neither of us speaking. 7 years of history, pain, betrayal, and revenge stretched between us like an invisible wall. Sarah, Emma said finally, her voice calm but cautious. Hi, Emma. Would you like to talk privately? She asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Emma led me to her office, a small room with a desk, 2 chairs, and more photos of the women she had helped. She closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit down. I have to admit, I never expected to see you here, Emma said, settling into the chair behind her desk. I know. I came to apologize. Emma's eyebrows rose slightly. Apologize? For what I did to you? After your arrest, during your trial, while you were in prison. All of it. Emma leaned back in her chair, studying me. What specifically are you apologizing for, Sarah? The question caught me off guard. I had expected Emma to either forgive me immediately or to refuse to forgive me at all. I hadn't expected her to ask for details. I destroyed your life systematically. I made sure your sentence was as harsh as possible. I isolated you from everyone who might have supported you. I made your time in prison harder than it needed to be. I prevented your early release. I turned your punishment into torture. Emma nodded slowly. Yes, you did all of those things. The question is, why are you apologizing now? I struggled to find the right words. Because I've been in therapy, and I've realized that what I did was wrong. It was cruel and vindictive, and it went way beyond anything you did to me. I see, Emma said. And what do you want from me now? Forgiveness? I don't know. I just knew I needed to tell you I was sorry. Emma was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her thinking carefully about what she wanted to say. Sarah, I appreciate you coming here, and I appreciate your apology. But I need you to understand something. I forgave you years ago, not because you deserved it, but because I needed to let go of my anger in order to heal. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But forgiveness doesn't mean I've forgotten what you did to me. And it doesn't mean I'm ready to pretend that we can go back to being sisters. You didn't just punish me for my crimes, Sarah. You systematically destroyed every aspect of my life with a level of calculation and cruelty that honestly still takes my breath away. Her words stung, but I knew she was right. The person I thought I knew, the sister I loved, would never have been capable of what you did to me, Emma continued. I don't know who you became during those years, but it wasn't anyone I recognized. I know, I whispered. I became someone I don't recognize either. The difference is that I've spent the last several years rebuilding my life and trying to become someone better than I was before. Have you? The question hit me like a slap. Had I become someone better than I was before? Or had I just learned to feel guilty about who I had become? I'm trying, I said. That's why I'm here. Emma nodded. I hope that's true, Sarah. I really do. Because the person who did those things to me was capable of incredible cruelty. And I'd hate to think that person is still out there, waiting to hurt someone else the way she hurt me. We talked for another hour, and it was the most honest conversation Emma and I had ever had. She told me about her years in prison, about the loneliness and despair she had experienced, and about the moment when she decided to stop being a victim of circumstances and start taking control of her life. I told her about my therapy, about the realization that my revenge had consumed me, and about my struggle to understand how I had become capable of such systematic cruelty. The hardest part, I admitted, is that I'm not sure I regret it. Part of me still thinks you deserved everything that happened to you. Emma smiled sadly. At least you're honest about it. That's more than you were 7 years ago. When our conversation was over, Emma walked me to the door of the recovery center. Before I left, she said something that I will never forget. Sarah, I want you to know that in a strange way, I'm grateful for what you did to me. I stared at her in shock. Grateful? You destroyed the life I was living, which was a lie built on addiction and selfishness. You forced me to face the consequences of my actions completely and without any cushion of sympathy or support. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through, but it was also what I needed to become the person I am today. She paused, looking at the building behind her that housed her life's work. I would never have built this place, never would have helped these women, never would have found my purpose, if you hadn't destroyed my old life so completely. Your revenge became my redemption, even though that wasn't your intention. I don't understand, I said. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for the best thing we ever do. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find out who we really are. Emma looked at me intently. The question is, what are you going to do with your second chance? Because coming here today, apologizing to me, facing what you did, this is your second chance, Sarah. Don't waste it. I drove home in a daze, Emma's words echoing in my mind. Your revenge became my redemption. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find out who we really are. Emma had lost everything, her freedom, her family, her future, and had used that loss to become someone extraordinary. I had won everything I thought I wanted: perfect revenge, complete victory, total domination over my enemy, but I had lost myself in the process. The question Emma had asked haunted me: what was I going to do with my second chance? Over the following months, I threw myself into therapy with a new intensity. I started to understand that my obsession with revenge had been about more than just punishing Emma. It had been about trying to regain control over a world that had suddenly become unpredictable and dangerous. Emma's betrayal had shattered my belief that I could trust the people I loved. Instead of dealing with that fear and vulnerability, I had chosen to become powerful enough to destroy anyone who might hurt me. But power built on revenge and cruelty was hollow and ultimately self-destructive. It had isolated me from everyone in my life and turned me into someone I couldn't respect. Dr. Hayes helped me understand that true strength came not from the ability to destroy others, but from the ability to heal from their betrayals without becoming cruel in return. Emma found her strength in helping others heal from their mistakes, Dr. Hayes said. Where will you find yours? That question led me to make a decision that would change the direction of my life completely. I decided to leave my job in psychology and go back to school to study addiction counseling and rehabilitation. If Emma could transform her worst experience into her greatest contribution, maybe I could do the same. Maybe I could use my experience with betrayal, revenge, and the psychology of cruelty to help others who were struggling with similar darkness. It took me 3 years to complete my additional training, and during that time I continued therapy and worked hard to understand the person I had been and the person I wanted to become. When I finished my training, I applied for a job at a rehabilitation center that worked with people coming out of the criminal justice system. During my interview, I was completely honest about my background, my experience with my sister, and my own journey from revenge to healing. The director of the center, a former prosecutor who had dedicated her career to rehabilitation rather than punishment, was intrigued by my story. "You understand both sides of this equation," she said. "You know what it's like to be betrayed and what it's like to choose cruelty in response. That gives you a unique perspective that could be valuable to our clients." I started working at the rehabilitation center 6 months later, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something meaningful with my life. My clients were people who had made mistakes, often terrible mistakes, and were trying to rebuild their lives in a world that had little patience for their redemption. I understood their struggle in a way that most counselors couldn't, because I had seen both sides of the equation. I had been the victim of betrayal, and I had also been the person capable of systematic cruelty. I knew what it was like to be consumed by anger and the need for revenge, and I knew what it was like to become someone you didn't recognize in pursuit of those feelings. Many of my clients had hurt people they loved while they were struggling with addiction, mental illness, or other problems. They carried enormous guilt and shame about their actions, just as Emma had. But they also faced rejection and cruelty from the very people they had hurt, just as Emma had faced from me. I was able to help them understand that while they couldn't control how others responded to their mistakes, they could control how they responded to that rejection. They could choose to become bitter and angry, or they could choose to use their experience to become better people and help others. It was the same choice Emma had made in prison, and the same choice I was making every day in my recovery from revenge. 2 years into my new career, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was from Emma. "Sarah," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I hope you don't mind me calling you. I got your number from the rehabilitation center where you work." "Of course not," I said, though my heart was racing. We hadn't spoken since my visit to her recovery center 3 years earlier. "I have a proposition for you," Emma continued. "I'm expanding my recovery center, and I'm looking for addiction counselors who understand the criminal justice system. Your director gave you an incredible recommendation when I called to ask about you." I was stunned. "You want me to come work for you? I want you to consider it. I think we could do incredible work together, Sarah. We both understand what it's like to make terrible mistakes and face the consequences. We both understand what it's like to choose between revenge and redemption. That's exactly the kind of understanding our clients need." The idea of working with Emma, of turning our twisted history into something that could help other people, was both terrifying and inspiring. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, I want you to know that I'm not offering you this job out of some sense of family obligation or because I'm trying to force a reconciliation between us. I'm offering it to you because I think you've become exactly the kind of person our clients need to see." "What do you mean?" "Someone who chose darkness for a while but found her way back to the light. Someone who knows what it's like to be consumed by destructive emotions but learned to transform them into something positive. Someone who proves that it's never too late to change who you are and what you do with your life." After Emma hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about her offer. The idea of working with her seemed impossible. How could we collaborate professionally when we had such a complicated and painful personal history? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that our complicated history was exactly what would make us effective. We had both been to the darkest places human beings can go, and we had both found our way back. We could show other people that redemption was possible, even after the worst betrayals and the cruelest revenges. I called Emma back the next day and accepted her offer. Working with Emma was strange at first. We maintained strict professional boundaries and rarely talked about our personal relationship. But as we worked together to help our clients, I began to see a different side of the woman who had once been my sister. Emma had developed an incredible ability to see potential in people that everyone else had given up on. She could look at someone who was broken, bitter, and seemingly hopeless, and find the spark of humanity that could be nurtured back to life. She had learned to do this, I realized, because she had been that broken, bitter, and hopeless person herself. And because she had experienced both the cruelty that could destroy someone and the compassion that could save them. Our clients responded to Emma with a mixture of respect and awe. They could see that she understood their struggles not from textbooks or training, but from lived experience. When she told them that change was possible, they believed her because she was living proof. I learned from watching Emma work that forgiveness was not weakness or naivety. It was a form of strength that allowed someone to transform poison into medicine, pain into purpose, and betrayal into wisdom. 6 months into our professional partnership, Emma and I had our first real personal conversation since I had apologized to her years earlier. We were working late one evening, reviewing cases and planning treatment approaches for our clients. As we were getting ready to leave, Emma said something that caught me completely off guard. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" I tensed up, not sure I was ready for a personal conversation. "I guess. Do you think we'll ever be sisters again?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on our professional relationship that I hadn't allowed myself to think about our personal one. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't know if we can get back what we lost." Emma nodded. "I don't think we can get back what we lost either. But I've been wondering if we could build something new." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we're not the same people we were 7 years ago. You're not the person who destroyed my life, and I'm not the person who betrayed you. We've both changed completely." She paused, looking at me carefully. "Maybe we can't be the sisters we used to be, but maybe we could be the sisters we are now. If we both want to." I thought about Emma's question for weeks. Did I want to rebuild a relationship with her? Was it even possible after everything that had happened between us? The answer came to me gradually as I watched Emma work with our clients. She had the ability to see people not as they were, but as they could become. She could look past their mistakes and failures to the potential for growth and redemption that existed in everyone. If she could do that for strangers, maybe she could do it for me. And maybe I could learn to do it for her. 3 months later, on the anniversary of the day I had found those men in my bedroom, Emma and I had dinner together for the first time in 8 years. It was awkward at first. We both struggled to find conversation topics that didn't lead back to our painful history. But gradually, we began to talk about our work, our hopes for the recovery center, and our clients' success stories. "Do you remember Mrs. Patterson?" Emma asked, referring to a woman who had completed our program 6 months earlier. "The one who was convinced she was too old to change her life?" I replied. "That's her. She called me yesterday. She got a job as a peer counselor at a treatment center in the next county. She's helping other women who are struggling with the same issues she faced. Emma smiled, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the sister I had once known and loved. That's what I love most about this work, Emma continued. Watching people discover that they're not defined by their worst moments. That they can become someone completely different if they're willing to do the work. Is that what happened to us? I asked. Did we become completely different people? Emma considered the question carefully. I think we became who we always had the potential to be. I always had the capacity for addiction and betrayal, just like I always had the capacity for compassion and service. You always had the capacity for cruelty and revenge, just like you always had the capacity for healing and forgiveness. So which version of ourselves is real? I asked. Both, Emma said simply. All of them. We're complex people capable of terrible things and beautiful things, sometimes simultaneously. The question isn't which version is real. The question is which version we choose to nurture and which version we choose to starve. Over the following months, Emma and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. It was nothing like the sisterhood we had shared before her addiction and my revenge. It was more mature, more cautious, and built on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom rather than blind trust. We both understood that we were capable of hurting each other deeply. We had both proven that. But we also understood that we were capable of choosing not to hurt each other, even when we had the opportunity and the justification. Our relationship became a living example of the principle we taught our clients every day, that people could change, that redemption was possible, and that some relationships could survive even the deepest betrayals if both people were willing to do the hard work of healing. 1 year after we started working together, Emma and I opened a second location of our recovery center. The expansion was funded by a grant we had received for our innovative approach to rehabilitation, which emphasized the transformative power of forgiveness and second chances. At the grand opening ceremony, Emma was asked to speak about the philosophy behind our program. She stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of former clients, community leaders, and other professionals in the field. 7 years ago, Emma began, I was sitting in a prison cell, convinced that my life was over and that I would never be anything more than the worst thing I had ever done. I had betrayed people I loved, I had hurt innocent victims, and I had lost everything that mattered to me. The audience was completely silent, hanging on her every word. But I learned something important during those dark years. We are not defined by our worst moments unless we choose to be. We are not trapped by our mistakes unless we decide to stay trapped. And we are not condemned to repeat our failures unless we refuse to learn from them. Emma looked directly at me in the audience, and I could see tears in her eyes. I also learned that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the same people who teach us the most important lessons. Sometimes the experiences that seem designed to destroy us are actually designed to transform us. And sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the foundation for the best thing we ever do. When Emma finished her speech, the audience gave her a standing ovation. But I remained seated, overwhelmed by the realization that she was talking about me. I had been the person who hurt her the most, but I had also been the person who taught her the most important lessons. My revenge had been designed to destroy her, but it had actually transformed her into someone extraordinary. And now, by working together to help others, we were transforming our twisted history into something beautiful and meaningful. After the ceremony, Emma and I stood together outside the new recovery center, watching our clients and their families celebrate the opening of a place that represented hope and second chances. Do you ever regret it? I asked Emma suddenly. Do you ever wish none of this had happened? Emma was quiet for a long moment, considering my question. I regret the pain I caused, she said finally. I regret the people I hurt and the mistakes I made. I regret the years we lost and the trust that was broken. She paused, looking at the building behind us. But I can't regret who I became because of it all. I can't regret this place, or these people we're helping, or even the relationship we have now. It's not the relationship we had before, but in some ways it's deeper and more meaningful because it's built on truth and forgiveness rather than assumption and blind trust. What about my revenge? I asked. Do you regret what I did to you? Emma smiled, and I saw something in her expression that I had never seen before, genuine gratitude. Your revenge saved my life, Sarah. It destroyed the person I was, which was someone I didn't want to be anymore anyway. It forced me to face the consequences of my actions completely and without any shortcuts. It gave me no choice but to change or die. She turned to face me directly. I wouldn't recommend your methods to anyone else, she said with a slight laugh. But I can't regret the results. Your cruelty became my crucible, and I emerged from it as someone I could finally respect. That night, as I drove home from the grand opening ceremony, I thought about the journey Emma and I had taken together. From sisters to enemies to something entirely new and unexpected. We had both made terrible choices and hurt each other in ways that seemed unforgivable. But we had also both chosen to transform our pain into purpose and our mistakes into wisdom. My revenge had been perfect in its cruelty and devastating in its effectiveness. I had succeeded in destroying Emma's old life completely and systematically. But Emma had gotten the last word by using my destruction as the foundation for her redemption. She had turned my cruelty into her compassion, my calculated revenge into her genuine healing. And in the end, we had both won and we had both lost. We had lost the innocence of our original relationship, but we had gained something perhaps more valuable, the knowledge that forgiveness was possible even after the deepest betrayals, and that redemption was available even after the cruelest revenges. Our story had become a testament to the possibility of transformation, proof that people could change and relationships could heal if both parties were willing to do the hard work of facing their own darkness and choosing to nurture their capacity for light. 5 years later, Emma and I had expanded our recovery program to 4 locations across the state. We had helped hundreds of people rebuild their lives after addiction, incarceration, and other devastating mistakes. Our success wasn't measured only in statistics, though the numbers were impressive. It was measured in the transformation we saw in people who had given up on themselves, in the families that were reunited, in the communities that learned to see potential for redemption rather than just reasons for punishment. Emma and I had both been broken people who had broken each other. But we had learned to use our brokenness as the foundation for healing, both for ourselves and for others. My perfect revenge had created the perfect opportunity for Emma's redemption. Her forgiveness had created the perfect opportunity for my transformation. And together, we had created something that neither of us could have built alone, a living example that no one is beyond hope, no mistake is beyond redemption, and no relationship is beyond healing if the people involved are willing to choose love over hate, forgiveness over revenge, and healing over destruction. Emma was right that night years ago when she said that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing you ever do. My betrayal had become her redemption. My revenge had become her transformation. And together, our twisted history had become other people's hope for healing. And that night, as I looked back on everything that had happened between us, I realized that Emma had taught me the most important lesson of all, that the most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemy, it's showing them a better way to live and then choosing to walk that path together. What would you do in this situation? Tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this story of twisted revenge and unexpected redemption, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice, forgiveness, and the power of second chances.